Welcome to the Art of Growth, where we use the Enneagram and the best tools we can find to do the work, to do the hard work so that we can actually move toward the person we know we can be, to move our organization towards what we know it can be as well. So that's what we're doing. And today is a microcosm, a piece of that work to move toward that goal. Like we said last week, our emphasis for this season, for this time, is going to be on the instincts of the Enneagram, which we introduced in last week's episode. So if you missed that, you definitely need to hear that before hearing this. So last week we gave an overview of the instincts, and this week we were talking about how they influence type. But you do need the background knowledge of last week's episode to move into this week. So we have a new tool we have developed to help with this instincts journey, and you have to be on our email list to get it. So go to theartofgrowth.org to sign up for our email list, and then you will be one of the first to receive what we've been working on. The Enneagram is growing in its influence as far as how it is used in the workplace. It has now become the number one psychometric tool being used in the workplace. And from our work with organizations, we can see why. It is hugely beneficial. If you are considering bringing the Enneagram into your workplace, reach out to us through our website, and you can contact Suzanne there. And we can look at how to merge where the company wants to go with some of the communication development, the emotional intelligence development, and just some of the practical know-how that this has helped us understand as far as how companies move and where they can get stuck based on the locks in the personality system or the mechanisms of the people leading. And we all need to have that lens so we know how to move forward. And we can help with that. And I'm so thankful for the organizations who have invited us in to help with that. And we want to help more because it is such a worthy use of our time. You can also go to our website to find out about upcoming group coaching, typing interviews, individual coaching, whatever you need, you can reach out to us there. If you haven't, please follow us on Instagram, just called Art of Growth. And I'm going to wrap up this intro so we can get to it. So you might need to take notes for this one. There's going to be a lot of information in this one. A lot of times we are story and experience. This is going to be very informative, and you might want to take notes, just to give you a heads up. So my name is Jim Zartman, and this is my conversation with Joel Hubbard about how the instinct influences type. Let's do it. Welcome to the Art of Growth. I'm Jim Zartman.
And I'm Joel Hubbard. And we are going to be talking about instincts and the types. And the first thing I want to say about that is our first episode on this, way back with Beatrice Chestnut, was absolutely amazing. We loved it. She is amazing, clearly.
Yeah. When people say, like, what's the best book on the Enneagram, I usually say hers.
Oh, I'm always pointing people to that book.
I always say that one,
Yeah, I love it. So we did one, and we went through the instincts, and now we're doing a second one, and this one is going to be what happens when the instincts match up with the types. Yeah. So when we did the instincts, this is like the instinct at its purest form, as best as we could. And by the way, when we're talking about the instincts, we're still doing it through our lens, right? There's the subjective piece of it. None of us are completely objective. But we describe the instincts in their sort of pure form. There is no one that has an instinct in its pure form.
Right.
We express that instinct, or the instinct gets expressed through our type.
Yeah.
And so our type plus the instinct creates what is oftentimes called in the Enneagram a subtype. And it looks different. It looks different than the pure instinct. So some people say, well, geez, I think I have that as my dominant instinct, but I don't do that. I do this. And you should say that. That should be your reaction.
Yeah, and when we say subtype, we mean your dominant instinct paired with your dominant type. So when we say someone is like a social 9, we mean their dominant instinct and their type. Because people ask us a lot about wings and stuff like that, and we don't do a lot with wings in our work. We really feel like the instinct is a much better way to understand the nuance of the type than the wing can ever be.
Absolutely.
So this is something that has grown in our work and our attention over the last couple of years. But we just want to be clear on that. Like, we think it's much more important to understand your what we call subtype, which is your dominant instinct paired with your type.
Yeah. And so let's begin with the body center.
Yeah.
We'll start with the 8, the 9, and then we'll go to the 1. The interesting thing about what happens with the instinct and the type is that the instinct can double down on the type. If you are a self-preservational 8, for example, 8s will already sort of tend to be against in their energy disposition towards the world. And then if you have an 8 plus the self-preservation already tends to think about preserving the self above, say, the larger group. And so if you have that instinct plus the type, it can accentuate some of the type's disposition.
Right. And the 8, just to remind us, we'll just do a couple one-liners as we go through these. The 8's attention goes towards the need to be strong, to be self-sufficient, to deny weakness in order to keep themselves moving.
Yeah. And so with the self-preservational 8, you'll see a lot more against, you'll see a lot more push, you'll see a lot more of the even pulling away from people and isolating themselves. Now, this is not universally true, but as I know a self-preservational 8 who is very extroverted and loves people and loves to be around people. Yeah. But when it comes to that, I also watch as there's a shift. This is a close friend of mine. So I watch as the shift takes place where there's a very much an against when it comes to the area of resources.
Yeah. It's more about a prioritization. Like where does the attention go? Again, where the attention goes, the energy follows. And for a self-pres 8, they can be social, they can be extroverted, but the attention is going to go towards the preservation of self and the need to be strong.
Yeah. This is why it can make it difficult, if you're a self-preservational 8, to move towards the other instincts, like the sexual instinct, say, or the social instinct. Because there's a doubling down, it confirms your type in some ways. And so that can be challenging if you're going to grow when you have that happening. And those are the ones that we can read pretty easily. Oh, that's an 8. Or that's and we'll go through the different types. But it makes it obvious.
Yeah.
This is your type. But it also explains why it makes it not so obvious when you have a different instinct.
Yeah.
So the next instinct for the 8 would be the sexual instinct. So this is not the countertype of the 8, but there are some parts of the sexual instinct that does make that 8 appear sometimes like a different type, like maybe a 4, because there's a lot more access to the emotional center.
Yes.
Right? So we've talked about, and I don't know if we'll do it in this episode or in another episode, but how even the instincts themselves match up pretty well with the centers of intelligence. So if you have a self-preservational instinct, it kind of matches up pretty much with the body center. Sexual instinct, pretty much with the heart center. The social instinct with the head center. So when you see the sexual energy come into a type, it can call up a little bit more of the emotion that's present within all of us.
Yeah, and what you just said, it reminds me of like when you just said that, when we talk about what came online first as a human, your body came online first. A small child is like a bundle of emotions, and your cognitive functions come on last and aren't even fully developed till you're in your mid-20s. So your body, that's the self-pres, comes on first. Then the heart, the sexual comes on, and then the sort of social head energy comes on last. So they mimic the development of the human in both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. So sorry, carry on.
So yeah, no, that's really good. So the sexual 8 will have more access to the emotions and maybe a little bit more fiery in the emotions. So you'll see quick to tears, or then flip right to anger, or feel shame and kind of, express that. And so that will appear to some who don't know yet. Are you a 4 because you're so emotional?
And there's an intensity to it too. So it has that, it carries that intensity, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's helpful to understand. And then when we move to the social instinct, that is the countertype, because the social instinct has an adaptability built into it, whereas the 8 tends not to be so adaptable. The 8 tends to have more of a, this is the right thing to do. I'm going to do it my way or the highway. Yeah. And so what happens when the social instinct is the dominant instinct for the 8 is that it softens the 8 a little bit. There's more of a reading of others as opposed to reading of the self and knowing what the self wants to do and thinks is the right thing to do, and then goes about and makes it happen. The social 8, oh, wait, there are other people in the room here I got to think about.
Yeah, the bonding and affiliating can reduce the intensity of the 8's sort of charged ahead nature because their attention is more tuned into the desire of belonging in the group.
Yeah. Let's move to the 9, the self-preservational 9. This is another one in which if you have the 9 already, tends towards an avoidance of anything that creates discomfort, anything that can take away their inner peace, their inner calm. And that is part of the reason why the 9 tends to avoid themselves even. Like, I'm going to fade into groups. I'm going to merge into the agenda of other people so that I don't have to make a decision. I don't have to do anything that creates any possible disruption within me. It's easier to just go along to get along. Well, self-preservational helps with that because the self-preservation, again, is about preserving the self. And so the 9 already thinks that I don't want to be a problem. I don't want to be in the way of other things. I don't want to create disruption. And so the self-preservation accentuates that. Preserve the self above all else, and make sure you don't create these problems in the world. Yeah,
often there's the instinct that amplifies the type. A lot of times when I see meme culture or sort of this reductionistic stuff that we've seen a lot of in the Enneagram world with it becoming more popular, what you see is it sort of puts on display the typical version.
It does.
So when people do the meme culture of the 9, it looks more like the self-preservational 9. It doesn't look like the sexual 9. It definitely doesn't look like the social 9.
Does not look like the social, no.
Not at all. But it still has that element where this is what people often think of as a classic 9 is the self-pres 9.
It's really good that you said that. I think, you imagine the 9, this large, overweight person sitting on a comfortable couch, eating nachos, watching movies. It's like this sort of like sloth. I'm going to just go into my ease and my comfort.
Neutralize anything that could cause.
And because 9s are in the body center.
Yeah.
If you have the self-preservation, which tends to match up well with the body center, you have this real physicality to this type. And so they're very much in their body. They know what they want from a comfort standpoint. And so they can overdo the physical piece of it. But it's also where their physical attention is really helpful because they can express more of their own 9-ness through the physical world. And being a body center, that's how they do it. The sexual 9, though, that's where it starts to pull a little bit away. Again, but still not the counter type yet. Still within that 9. But because there's a sort of a sexual energy, the heart energy, because 9s can neutralize their emotional center quite a bit, their own and also the emotions of other people. Yeah. The sexual 9 will do that a little less because they're aware of their emotions. I've heard from sexual 9s who say, I don't have too much of a problem with my own emotions. Whereas I'll hear from self-pres 9s who say, I don't like emotions at all. I definitely neutralize them all the time. And so the sexual 9 will access a bit more, feel more, cry more easily, and then pick up on maybe some of the emotions of other people as well. And they can be a bit more ethereal, a bit more in the imagination, the imaginative area. They can kind of like go off in La La Land because that is, again, where the romantic piece kicks in, or the ideas, the connection with other people. It can become a little bit more that way than, say, the self-pres 9.
Yeah, and I remember when I first hearing about this, I thought it countered the 9 because of the sexual energy tends to be more comfortable with risk and pushing boundaries, which sounds so antithetical to the 9 because that would cause conflict.
Right.
But the sexual 9 has that fusion immersion thing big time of the sexual energy where it doesn't just merge but fuses with another person.
That's an excellent point. That's where it can double down on that a little bit. But to your point about risk, where you see that show up, though, is also in the area of relationship where they are a little bit more willing to be testy and push back. So they'll do the immersion and, complete fusion almost and losing themselves. And then at other times they'll have this sort of, pushback and little challenge of others, and that's where the risk kicks in.
Yeah, in that one-on-one context.
Yeah, in the one-on-one context, absolutely.
Maybe not with other areas, but in that one-on-one context.
Yes.
Yeah, you'll see that.
Yeah.
And then the counter type for the 9 is the social 9.
Yeah, and that is because the social 9 thinks about the group So again, the instinct is about the group, and the 9 can merge in that environment, but they'll take on the group's agenda. And so that's when they become really tuned into there are so many things to be done that have to be done, and then they want to be useful, and they want to be helpful, and they want to be connected to the group. And so that really causes them to become super busy and wanting to make sure that the group is doing well, that they're doing their part to maintain, and it's really on them. So whereas in other cases it's sort of merging with another person and losing themselves and trying not to create conflict, this one is like, I've taken on the group's agenda, and now it's on me, right? It's on me to make sure that there's no problem, that I'm not the problem, that I anticipate the needs, make sure that we're getting stuff that needs to be done completed. And so that 9 actually has the opposite and can be workaholics, can appear as a 3 in many respects because they're driven, they're goal-oriented, they're getting stuff done.
Well, if they've merged with the energy of a group or an organization that is intense, they merge with that intensity and they look intense. That's a good point.
Yes. Yeah.
But they don't, even if it's not kind of core to them, but that's part of why a lot of times the social 9 is the counter type, where it tends to reduce that side that brings everything down and pulls everything back, because if what it means to be in that environment requires a higher level of intensity, they merge with that intensity.
Yes, that's a really good point to make there. Absolutely. So the last in the body center is the type 1. And the type 1, they're in the body center. So again, but very body oriented, so practical. So you think in terms of that. That
with
type
a real
1
need, that drive to be good, for self-improvement.
Yes.
Need to be good and right and do the right thing. Yes.
It really doubles down on that, perfectionism that the type 1 tends towards. So they're a bit more, again, a bit more anxious. Again, self-pres always gives a little bit more of that anxiety. So you'll see that more in the 1, anxious about resources, anxious about things that relate to that area. So that is the doubling down on the 1. The next one, the sexual 1, is the counter type of the 1. So the reason why is because you think about the self-pres 1, because they're practical, because they have a need for perfection, need to be good, a need to not be at fault, and a need for order and for control of themselves, there's a tendency to avoid the emotions or to look at the emotions. Some will look at the emotions, they'll feel them, but then they go back to, this is not helpful to me, this could lead me in a direction that won't be good, that won't help me to improve anything or myself. And so they'll sort of look at the emotion and then table it and then move on and get back into action. And so you'll see more of a control around the self-pres 1. It's more self-controlled, it's more flat, more even-keeled, in a tightness about them. Okay. In the sexual 1, it kind of flips a little bit because there you have more of expression of emotion. So you can see a 1 that's a sexual 1 could snap and yell. You won't see that with a self-pres 1. They avoid the expression, the intense expression of emotion. And so the sexual 1 won't nearly as much. And so there, perfection tends to show up, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to try to perfect you and make you better. And so that's where it tends to show up more so.
I think I know a sexual 1. I know she's a 1, but I think she's Catholic, and she was in this big Catholic mass. It was like a Christmas service. It was like 1,000 people a few years ago. And the pastor was using this time to take on one of these very conservative social agendas that she really disagreed with, and totally stood up and yelled no in the middle of the service.
Wow.
And ended up in this thing where she was in conversations with the bishop, and there was all this trouble around this because she just she's definitely has that access to that emotion and that intensity kind of thing. But then, has to, question it and did I do the right thing? And this is why I think I did the right thing in that environment, because that level of intensity is there in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect from 1. So it doesn't look like the typical 1. And when we say countertype, we're referring to the 1 that changes the dynamic enough that they don't look like the typical or classic type 1. So the sexual is the countertype for the 1.
And they can look like an 8. Sometimes they get confused with 8s because of that fiery, kind of more expressive.
Gotcha. Yeah.
and can stand up in the middle of a church service like that and say something like that. And
I've also seen them confused with fours because the
for sure.
emotionality,
Absolutely.
and then the questioning of their emotionality,
Yes.
which can look a little bit like the head-heart loop of the 4.
Absolutely.
So a sexual 1 and a 4 might confuse themselves a little bit more consistently. We'll talk about the social last, the social one.
So the social is the one that tends to express their perfection more through trying to reform society. They carry a lot of weight around, I have to be the exemplar. I'm the one to be the change, I'm being the change, and I'm an example to the rest of you on how to be the change. And the social attention is much more towards the group. And so you'll see certain reformers are sometimes presumed to be type 1s. And so that will oftentimes be the case because their attention tends to go to, I want to change the world, not just my partner or myself.
Right. All right, so let's move on to the heart types.
Heart types. So the self-preservational 2, let's begin there. This is starting off with the counter type of the 2. Mm-hmm. 2s have a need to be helpful, to be loved, to feel connected, driven by the sense that maybe they're not wanted, maybe they're not loved, and so they're kind of going out to help and to feel that through helping I might then be loved, my own needs might be met. So this is the 2 going out in this direction and naturally leaning in this way. When it's met with a self-preservational instinct, that holds it back a little bit. That says, whoa, you're going out there and putting too much of yourself out. And so you're going to run out. You're going to run out of energy. You're going to run out of, you're not going to feel loved that way, So that 2 can actually turn a little bit more towards a little bit more self-indulgence. Whereas the other 2s, it's like, I need to be serving other people all the time. That's too selfish if I don't. The self-preservational 2 will tune into a little bit more to its own needs. And so it might overdo it sometimes in one area of self-care. But it's still not self-care. And so we can say safely to all 2s, like, the practice of self-care is very important. But that's where the needs can get reformed into the area of self-preservation or converted to that. Okay, I'm feeling the need to be loved, but instead I'm going to eat. I'm going to do something like that can scratch that itch for me. They're all helpful. All 2s are helpful for the most part, but they may not be as helpful. And they'll have a bit of that hold back sometimes or pull away. They can shut down a little bit more easily. So you see this with other 2s. When pushed to an extreme, 2s will say, if they feel like they're unappreciated, they've been giving, and no one's giving back to them, they can shut it down and go to the 8. Yeah. That's the line, the arrows there. And that's when they say no more. Right. Whereas a self-preservational 2 may have a bit more access to that. And so they might end up going to that a little bit more quickly than the other 2s. They tune into that and they're like, that's it, I've had enough. So I both want to help you, but then I'm tired of always helping you because you're always needy and you're always asking for help. That's happening within the 2. The self-preservational 2 will pick up on that fairly quickly and just say enough,
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the sexual 2.
Sexual 2 is kind of doubling down because of the area of the heart. So again, we're moving into the sexual instinct now, and the sexual instinct pairs up quite well with the heart center. So if you have a 2 that's already tending to read the room, the emotional center, 2s read the emotional center of other people. They pick up on that. And now you have the sexual instinct that's turned on. Yeah, they're reading that. They're reading it, and they are able to merge very easily with other people where they can use charm, they'll use charisma, they'll use flattery. They'll just, it's this I want to be one with you.
The fusion.
It's the fusion.
It's not like the merging of the 9, but it is more like a fusion.
It's a fusion of absolutely.
Yeah, and so they might single it out where the social is wider, but the sexual 2, it's a lot more directed at a single person. They're going to walk into the room, see the person who needs help, go to them. There's going to be some intensity to that exchange. Yeah. And they're going to maybe even overcommit to, I have to take care of this, that ownership piece of that can come in for 2s.
I had a friend who said when I first met my husband, he was into football. I wasn't into football, but I'm a sexual 2. I began to act like I loved football. I wore the jersey of his favorite team. Yeah. I would cheer. I learned everything I could about football. And I lost myself in that just totally fused with him in that space. So that's very much the sexual 2 energy can make people do that. The social 2, it has an attention to the group. So where it wants to be helpful is to the larger group. And because of that, that 2 may not be nearly as warm with people, with the individual, with the one-on-one. Because the group is much more of the goal there. And they want to be helpful to that. And the feedback from the group as to how they're doing is more important to them. That's a little bit, again, a slight tick away from the stereotype of the 2. Whereas they can be leaders, they can run an organization, they can make some tough decisions, they can hire, fire.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we call the social 2 is sometimes called the ladder climber.
Yeah.
Because they are more positional. They do try to gain a position, and they often end up leaders.
Yeah.
It's a very common thing for the social 2 because they have that warmth.
Yeah.
You know, when people meet them, they like them, they feel comfortable in their presence. But at the same time, they have the capacity of strategizing the move for themselves and for the group.
Yeah.
It's the mechanism is wanting to be helpful, but it's leveraging the strategy piece and the heart piece in order to make that happen.
Yes, yes. And even if I said they're cooler compared to other types, they're still warm, feeling leaders for sure.
Well, when you meet them, you feel that they're very warm.
Yeah.
You wouldn't necessarily know that all of that other stuff is functioning, but all that other stuff is definitely functioning.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So the 3, the self-preservational 3 is also the counter type.
Yeah.
The 3 is the type that reads the world around them as well as the 2, but what they're looking for is, do you see me as successful?
Right.
Do you see me as achieving so that I get this sense of self-worth? You know, I'm worth something if you see me that way. But the self-preservational instinct causes that 3 to focus much more on the home, much more on the making sure they have enough resources, that they're making sure they do the work right and do the work well. There's also an awareness of like, this is not good for me to always want affirmation and approval and adoration because of the self-preservational instinct. It's like, don't put yourself out there. You could get hurt by this. And there's also a moral attribution sometimes to that where it's like, this isn't the right thing. I shouldn't want this, even though they do want it. So sometimes these 3s can get confused with 1s. And because they like to do things right as well and to do things really good. Again, this is preserving the self is make sure you do a good job. You do the, you know. And so that's where some of the confusion sometimes lies. So they're not the stereotypical 3.
Yeah, and when Joel mentions the 1, this is a common mistake that can happen between 1s and 3s do get mixed up sometimes, and people understand, well, how is that possible? Because they're 2 very different worlds. Well, it is the subtype dynamic that makes certain types look a little bit more like each other than they typically would, the classic understanding of some of those types. And so, yes, the self-preservational 3 is going to look a little bit differently because they're not going to be as flashy. They're not going to be as externally focused. They have more of a quiet nature than those who are very much have the
putting
intensity
themselves
or
out
the
there.
out term that you see in the sexual and the social.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now we're getting a little closer by going to the sexual instinct towards more of what you would classically think of as a 3.
Yeah.
The sexual instinct, because it's the heart and the sexual instinct matches up with the heart, I have a 3 that they can read the world quite well, but they are doing a lot through their appearance. So their appearance then takes on a very important part of how the instinct is expressing itself through the 3. So the sexual instinct expresses itself through the 3, through the gender, through charisma, through charm, through a lot of through appearance. I watched one. It was the funniest thing as I reflect on this. The way he sat when he sat, now I can so see it was very deliberate and had an aesthetic to it. It was like, looks good sitting down, looks good standing up, looks good, everything was really, even in the positioning of their body there was a brilliance to it and a beauty to it.
Yeah, I imagine it had to have been a sexual 3 that created the phrase "image is everything."
Yeah.
Because that is very much consistent with that type and that energy in all of us that wants to kind of be seen a certain way or present.
Yeah.
Like these are the masters of that. These are literally the professionals of it. They, make their often they're living by they can stand on a stage and present in a certain way or have a picture taken, or they've got a skill for that, and that skill has cultivated a lifetime of energy into looking a certain way, presenting themselves in a certain way, using their words and their facial expressions in a certain way in order to achieve the result of the kind of success they want.
Yes. A friend of mine, we were just laughing and going through different sports figures and having debates as to fun debates. Again, disclaimer, you can't type anybody without, a conversation and really understanding the Enneagram and so on. So that's the disclaimer. But we were laughing because we were going through certain personalities, and he was saying, we were talking about basketball players and talking about Michael Jordan, and he's like, "Oh yeah, he's definitely a 3." That's what he thought, and I was like, I could totally see that. It's like, yeah, there's a certain swag about them, right? Even the swag and the way you move on the court, and the ability to draw the eyes on you is really one of the gifts of the strengths of the sexual 3.
Yep, I could totally see that. What about the social?
Social 3, you get more into the stereotype that is oftentimes formed around the 3, because that one, if you think of it, they like the adoration of the world around them, right? They need the affirmation that they're successful. Well, there is no greater stage than being in front of the world. The world of politics.
All the world's a stage, and we must each play our part. Social 3 statement.
Social 3, absolutely. I talk with social 3s. I've got clients who are, and for them, that is a drug. It's their drug of choice.
Yeah.
I mean, being in front of a group where the group is admiring and, lapping up their words and just so into them, it's a moment for them of just pure energy. And
how I would contrast them with the sexual is where the sexual 3 may be more about attraction, the social 3 is more about charm.
Yeah, the social 3 likes the approval of the group. Of the individuals is fantastic as well.
Yeah.
They'll take it, but
the individual is a great starting point.
It's a great starting point. But if I can get a group, a room that is like clapping, and I'm the number one best speaker or presenter, oh man, that is just juicy, right? That's the typical politician, right? So there's, and by the way, politicians are of every type.
Of course.
Maybe at some point we'll talk about the industries that tend towards a particular instinct. Yeah. That would be one of them. Because again, it's in front of a group, you're leading a group, you're thinking about the group dynamics, and you get the approval that you're doing a great job. That's
And it's so funny because some people look at politicians and are like, but why do they do this? Is it trying to have some power or influence? Because it's not like it's a ton of money. And a lot of times it's not a ton of power, but it is a stage.
It's a stage.
It is a way that you can look great by helping people and, I'm taking care of my constituents. There's a tuned into the we of that, but there's also admiration and affirmation that comes with it, which a lot of politicians use to great effect and to help people.
Absolutely.
Because a healthy 3 they employ a lot of people. They're great at standing on the stage. They're great at getting people to do things. They're great at motivating people towards a particular direction.
Yeah.
So, it is a skill, and it's a good one. So let's go into the 4 then.
So the self-preservational 4 is also the countertype. Countertype of the 4 is the type that needs to feel special. That this is the way towards being loved, worthy of love, is that you stand out, that you're not just mundane, average, run-of-the-mill. There's a truth, there's an authenticity, there's a beauty to you that makes you stand out. Well, what happens when you have the self-preservational instinct? Well, the self-preservational instinct says that's fine to stand out, to be special, but you know what? Honestly, it's much better to have money. It's much better to be able to survive. It's much better to be able to thrive and succeed in this world. Yeah. And by being unique or standing out or being special, that's not the primary way you're going to get there, although the self-preservational 4 still has a need for that.
Yeah.
It just gets expressed differently and in some ways a bit more perhaps cleverly. And this is not a value statement. There's genius to this, and also there's the low side to that. Yeah. But where they can succeed is in the area of the self-preservation, where there's need for more goals now because you've got to get somewhere. You've got to have the resources. You've got to have enough. And so you're going to tend to be more in that arena. So it's not uncommon for self-preservational 4s to have special things within their home, special things within the building that they own, because it's where the instinct gets to express itself much more. So rather than envy, which is the sort of core vice of the 4, and do it by wishing they were something different, that 4 gets into action much more. It's much more easy for that 4 to be in motion, get into action, to try to be equal with other people, right? All heart types do the comparison thing. The 4 definitely does it quite a bit. When we move to the sexual 4, sexual again pairing up with the heart, boy, that's a real doubling down on that 4.
More classic,
so
highly intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So that 4 starts to really look like a 4 because there is a lot of emotional expression.
Yeah, what people classically think of or typically think of when they think of a 4.
Yes. 4s, again, so even the self-preservation 4 has a lot of emotion throughout the day.
Right.
But there's less expression of that emotion because, well, you want to protect yourself. You don't want to put that out there. You can get harmed.
Right. Security comes with the expression. There's
yes.
a need for both. But with the sexual subtype, it is more raw.
It's out there.
It's
and
on fire.
There's more of a projection. Like, you're the cause of the way I feel, so I'm going to put that out there. But that 4 can get confused with an 8 when their predominant emotion is anger that they're willing to express. So they express a lot of anger and can seem very much like an 8 at times. They have just as much access to anger and willingness to express it and are not as needy for you to like them. They can be
more self-referencing
against.
than the other types,
Yeah.
than the other 2 4s.
Yeah. When you get to the social 4, you have a very classic expression of the 4 because the social 4 also expresses the emotion, tends to carry more shame visibly with them, and has an attention to the group and wanting to make sure that they're taking care of the group, but also they still are very much individualists, which they pull away. But because they do so, they'll take the weight of the group's issues on themselves. All 4s introject, and they take in the stuff from outside. And the social 4 does that quite a bit. So there's a bit more of that shame-carrying, introjection, and willingness to express the emotion, and a bit more adaptability to that 4 as well. They're more flexible because of the group. And again, that was one of the key components of social instinct, if you remember, is the ability to adapt.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where that happens quite a bit.
Where I think of 4s and the classic 4s thought of as having this real intensity, they do have more of a warmth. And I see them often like really wanting to care and include others.
For sure.
There's a real wanting to care for the people in the margins, pulling in the people in the margins.
Yeah.
There is that because they have a very high empathetic sense and a real high intuitive nature. Like all 4s are intuitive, but the social 4 has that intuition that is a little bit more relationally warm. So you're going to have a wider friendship circle than you would with like the sexual 4 or the self-preservational 4.
Yes, for sure. And the social and self-preservational 4 both will tend to shape themselves a little bit more around their environment than would the sexual 4. So
sexual 4 is not trying to adapt to their environment. They want to set the pace. They want to set the tone. They want to set the fashion. They want to set it forward.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're just really exciting to be around because it's just like possibility is on fire with like the sexual 4. But we got to turn the corner and we're rounded off with the head types. So we're going to start with the 5, the self-preservational 5.
That's a doubling down on the 5.
That is a doubling down. This is what you would classically think of as a 5, is the self-preservational.
Yeah. So 5s already are private people. Right? The 5 has a need for being resourced to face a world that demands or wants more than what they have to offer. They feel much more comfortable in their head center, spending time in gathering resources that are thoughts, concepts, systems. So when the self-preservational instinct is expressing itself through the 5, that 5 will tend to be more self-preservational, tend to keep things more to themselves. Already 5s withhold. So now it's a withholding of possessions, a withholding of material resources as well as cerebral resources or emotional resources, right? So it's I want to preserve this. The self-preservational 5 will do that. So you can imagine if you have an introverted self-preservational 5, that's a 5 that can live in the woods in the middle of nowhere, Maine, and, be okay and seldom see people. And so because there's this need, and by the way, this does not mean that fives are non-social beings. All humans are. Yeah. It's just that they're less aware of that need. And even when they become aware of that need, there's this countering effect from the instinct that says, whoa, people are going to want stuff from you. You may not have enough. You're going to be drained. You're going to be invaded by the needs of other people. And so that's what keeps the five at this place of, I both need to be around people. I know that. I need that for my own well-being. And yet I've got this instinctual drive plus my type.
Yeah, the privacy is on full effect. It's not getting countered by either the social or the sexual dynamic.
Right.
And so you're going to have a little bit more of that withdrawn state that is more evident or more, kind of classic to what people think of when they think of the five.
Which is the opposite of the sexual five.
Very different from the sexual five, yeah.
So the sexual five, because of the heart, so the sexual, again, pairing up with the heart center, causes that five to be a bit more emotionally expressive, but not to the world necessarily. I've seen some that are more expressive, but it's still very thoughtful. So fives are very deliberate and very thoughtful, even when they're doing this. It's not impulsive. It's still very thought out and guarded. But the sexual five will find generally one person, one partner, with whom they can open up and be more romantic, more expressive of themselves, of their feelings. And then to the rest of the world will tend to be quieter and more reserved and a different person. Already fives compartmentalize. They can do this naturally by having different parts of them that they express to the world around them and other parts that they don't, or personas they might put on in order to survive. And so if you have the sexual, that sexual instinct gives that more accessibility to that, where you can do that. And so that five will definitely look different. And that one gets confused sometimes with sevens. That one gets confused, even sometimes fours in that
or
space.
Threes,
or threes, There's more of a spontaneity, because if they're in a safe group and they've already opened up and shared their heart, they can be very expressive that way, particularly if they have extroversion as also one of their characteristics.
Yeah, Deb Ooten said that she thinks it's the most rare of all the types. I mean, she's seen the least amount in, all of her years of doing this. And I did a typing interview with one who is a pretty well-known actor. And it was interesting because I was very confused for a little while through the typing interview. And then when we started talking about some of the emotions, what I realized is even though she didn't necessarily see her own, she was very intrigued by emotions. She said she actually went into acting as a way to study emotions so that she could have an outlet for them because she didn't feel them herself.
Yeah.
And was kind of more withdrawn in having that one-on-one with her partner. So it took a while for the picture to come into play, but it's like, oh my goodness. Because that's what some Enneagram thinkers say, that a lot of actors are actually fives, because they can compartmentalize and create characters in their head who have these emotions and these facial expressions and these walks that are completely different. But to their own self, they don't want to be on the red carpet. There's like some of the most like method or well-known actors out there. They're pretty withdrawn. They really keep to themselves. They're pretty private, and they're very uncomfortable with that sort of out there kind of a world. And so you get this interesting dynamic because they are people who compartmentalize their emotions, but the sexual five is intrigued by them and wants to understand them and know them.
Yeah. You're also talking about the risk.
Yeah.
That's also one
risk.
of the categories under the sexual instinct. Yeah. More willing to take a risk. Oh, let me go explore this.
Yeah.
See what that's about.
Totally.
So the sexual five, again, is the counter type of the five because of this willingness to express emotion and access to the emotional center, and not as reserved in this area, not as protective and withholding of their emotional center.
More
willing to risk and so on. Yeah. And they can, especially if they're extroverted, they can then really seem like a seven because they're putting themselves out there.
Yeah.
And they're willing to do that. The social five is more stereotypical five, but their arena tends to be more of the group. So I know social five is a professor, and that's not unusual. There are a lot of fives who would choose that profession because they love information, data, and they love giving it out in a helpful way. So fives want to be useful. Fives love to be resources and help people with that. So if they can do that in a forum, then it really is a wonderful experience for them. So again, they can end up in any industry at all, but the ability to give out information, teach groups, and be useful to a larger group is the social instinct expressing itself through the five that way. So
it makes a lot of sense. Well, let's talk about the six, the self-preservational six. Again, something that we would classically think of as the six.
Yeah, for sure. Sixes have a need for safety, for security, for support in a world that's unsafe. And so they plan, they think in terms of worst case scenarios, a way to prepare themselves, to begin to think around how can we solve the future problems that could come our way. And so when you think of it that way and you match that up with self-preservation instinct, I mean, that's just a doubling down. And we need to have enough resources. We need to make sure we've got enough. Did we fix this? Did that get done? I mean, this is what I live with at home. It's this constant attention to, is this fixed? And did you check the snowblower, make sure it was ready for this was the first question as soon as this winter season started on is all this stuff around, are we prepared for what is coming around the corner in the arena of self-preservation?
The home, resources, do we have what we need?
Yes.
All of that different stuff. Yes.
And you think about how sixes are already warm types, tending towards warmth, tending towards compassion and caring. And it is a beautiful thing when you see a six creating that kind of home and nest environment, and they tend to bring that with them in different places they go. So when you get to the sexual six, that tends more towards the countering of the type because the sexual has more of a risk again. This is more of like I'm going to take risks. I'm going to push against things. And you had mentioned war as being one of the expressions of that. Well, in the six, the counter type tends to show up as more of a counterphobic. So you think of this self-preservation, that's the phobic. Think of the social, that's phobic. It's a fear that is present, or an anxiety, or a vigilance that is present there. Right. When you add the risk-taking component, the willingness to challenge, the willingness to jump out of a plane and,
to run at what you're afraid of.
Running at what you're afraid of.
Away from it.
Instead of away from it.
Yes.
That's really the sexual instinct that's willing to do so.
Yeah.
So, whereas routines and organization and order and following these things, the predictability that is so helpful to self-preservational sixes kind of starts to shift when you're bringing that sexual instinct in there. It tempers that. It causes the six to move in a more risky way at times, or willing to take more risks, still with the disposition of, I'm just planning at a more rapid pace in my head.
And they still want the security. They're still seeking
for sure.
They're still seeking that security and support. But what they're doing in order to obtain that motivation is to take risk and run at
confront the fear.
And confront the fear as opposed to avoiding the fear or withdrawing or mitigating the fear.
Exactly.
It's more confrontational.
Yeah.
Totally different from the social six.
Absolutely. And this is why they say the six, like the four, similar, 6 and 4, have the most variety because of the instincts. So you can have a self-preservational 6, and they're kind of, making sure everybody's okay in the room and checking in.
Self-preservational 6?
Self-preservational 6.
Yeah.
So they'll be like, are we okay? Are you and I okay? So they're very much concerned about that and will not confront. They're non-confrontational types. You get to the sexual 6, and that not so much. The sexual, they'll confront and they'll challenge because all sixes are trying to figure out, is there danger and where the danger is. They know the danger exists. It's not like, is there danger? It's that there is. I just need to find it. And the sexual 6 is going to confront it. That's the way they'll find it.
Yeah.
They'll surface it. So the social 6 is the one that tends more towards certainty. So all sixes have an issue around, or a desire to feel certain. Mm-hmm. All sixes do. But the social 6 tends to create some level of certainty, though it's tenuous, because again, the vigilance, the fear is still present. But they do so through knowledge, through social systems they can rely on, like experts, and then it's like, I've done enough of research. I know I can rely on this. and then they move out with certainty. So that's not the counterphobic. It's not like I'm going against it. It's just I've resourced myself enough that now I can make the decision.
Yeah, and this is there is a lot of these. When people talk about a lot of sixes in the world, you're going to have higher self-pres, but a lot of social sixes who these are the we first people.
Yeah,
because they are the ultimate of the loyal skeptic. It's
absolutely.
the we first.
Yes.
And so you see a lot of these in the world. Fear mechanism is in place, the need for security and safety, but there's also the we first, that we need to get there. It's not just enough that I have enough resources. It's very much a we mentality. So I think of the social six, in my mind, it's the most classic six. So but I don't
Could be.
I don't know.
So I'm thinking of a friend or a client. She's wonderful. She is an executive, high-level executive at an organization. She says, Joel, if I don't anticipate danger and didn't express it enough, and the team takes a decision that then causes something bad to happen, I own it. It's on me. Yeah. I feel bad. Even though I warned it, I feel like I still didn't do enough. I should have. So you're right on in terms of social, the we, it's like, this is my responsibility, my fault. That's the way that, that six would feel around the organization. So,
all right. So the type 7, we'll move over to the type 7, the self-preservational 7.
Yes. So the self-preservational 7 would appear as the stereotype in many regards. There's an aspect we're going to talk about that's not so much so, but in many regards, like the 7, like you would expect. So for the 7, the attention of the 7 goes towards the possibilities of the future. It tends to go towards what is going to be fun, what's going to keep myself stimulated and optimistic, in avoidance of all the darkness and the negativity of the world and oftentimes of our own inner self. And so when you think about that paired up with the self-preservational instinct, the self-preservational instinct does have a slightly countering effect. It's not the countertype, but it does have one, and that the 7 can tend to have its mind and attention go to a lot of different things, possibilities, starting things but not finishing things. Whereas a self-preservational will kind of say, well, we need to finish some things that we started because we need to make sure we get paid. We need to make sure that we have enough sleep. We need to make sure that we're healthy. We need to...
Yeah, so the self-preservational 7, it still has the 7 functioning for desire, for adventure, for excitement, for the what's next, but it also wants the stable and wants the secure. It's going to find an outlet for the adventure, but it also wants the stability, security. And so there is the greater capacity to finish things, like you mentioned, but they're going to find an outlet that is a little bit more out of control. So it's almost like there's the division
There is.
for that type of 7. There can be something that's like out of control and adventurous and just explore and all of the normal 7 mechanism. But then you have this other part that's just kind of like, but I have to make sure that I'm okay so that I am resourced enough to go have my adventure.
Yes. Well, and this is true for all types, even when we say that there are certain aspects of the instincts that will counter a little bit the type, is that you're still going to express your type through that instinct, right? So that's how it works. All right, so the self-preservational 7 will find itself expressing its need for more through toys and through experiences. That tends to be how it does it. It's very practical in that sense. They're also a little bit more protective of their circle. They may not be as trusting. So this is where we think of 7s as all trusting types.
Yeah,
they're
open.
like, I believe. The self-preservational kind of says, well, let's be careful because there are people that you can't trust. So they tend to have more of a close-knit group, even if they have wide touches with a lot of people. Yeah. And they are the ones that are classically known as, for the phrase, I know a guy. And when I say this to self-preservational 7s, they roar because they say this all the time, and they know this to be true of them. So they know where to get what they need. That's the resource intelligence of the instinct.
Resource intelligence. Yeah. So the sexual 7, since you know a thing or two about that.
I do. Sexual 7 brings on the heart a little bit more. So as a head type, 7s are head types, the heart suddenly awakens a little bit. So you see sexual 7s, and this is where some people say, well, I've seen 7s I think are emotional types, aren't they? You probably ran across a sexual 7.
Yeah.
Because they do. They have a bit more expression of emotion. And theirs tends to be more in their imagination. That's where things show up more, is the imagination, the concepts, the ideas.
Yeah.
The chasing happens there. Self-preservation, the chases happen in experiences and outings and food. I know some sevens that are self-preservation sevens, so into food and cooking and all that.
Yeah.
The sexual seven, it's more in the imagination, more in the concepts, more in the ideas, more in the exchanges between me and one other person. And, I went to an event and I had this conversation and that one with that person and that one with that person. I had all this sizzle happening, and it was so incredibly
And it does include
exciting.
the emotional sizzle. It does
Totally.
because it's the sexual energy is more in the heart, and the heart energy is a lot more about imagination and sizzle and connection. And so you have the sizzle of the emotion combined with the head type energy of adventure. And then so you have this expression that feels very much it's exciting. It's very full of possibility. I would say that the sexual seven is the most of the possible. What is possible?
Yeah.
Very open to, it could be terrible. Oh, but it could be great. But this could blow up everything and be really bad. But imagine how great it would be if it didn't. Like it's the capacity to see the possible, and it can be overly optimistic at times.
Absolutely.
And it can be blind to some of the dangers at hand, which is why self-pres people are good for them. But
very good, yes.
But there is the hope of what's possible, and people get that from them, and they feel that from them. So let's talk about the counter type of the seven, which is the social.
Yeah, so while we had said that there were some countering effects about the self-preservational seven, the social seven is the counter type. Because when you get to that place, even though you would think, well, social matches up with head, and isn't that a doubling down? In some regards, yes, because that seven will be very heady and very much in the concepts and so on. But because of the need to see the group and how the group is doing, right?
Yeah.
The serve the group and not the appetite of the seven.
Right.
So the core vice of the seven is gluttony. It's the need for more, the insatiable desires. Well, what happens when you've got a group? You can't meet that need. You'll find a different way of meeting that need. It will be through the group, right? But it appears more like a two because it is serving the group. It is very much interested in, can I get you something? How can I help you in this way? And what can I do? And so you'll see social sevens who can be great assistants, an assistant to someone else or to a CEO or will get involved in social causes and be part of a group there and will serve and love to do stuff on a practical level. And so that will be the way that social seven expresses itself, will be through how do I do this for the larger group. They can also be presidents of organizations because there's a little bit less of the I need to grab a hold of something, I need to chase something, and more of I'll get this done through the group. There's still sizzle, there's still fun, there's still, energetic.
When we do this, it'll be fun.
It'll be fun. Like, let's do this as a group and we can, and there's a lot of that. So very inspiring still.
It is inspiring, and it takes more effort, though, because it's not enough for me to have the experience. We need to have the experience together.
It is
We
very
need to
true.
have the
That's
fun.
very true.
Yeah.
So that's why it appears a little bit less like a seven, and sometimes quite a bit less as a seven because of that restraint.
Because they want really to have people come along with that experience with them.
Yeah.
So, wow, we went through all 9 types and how the instinct functions a little bit within each type. There will be a lot more to come on this, but we at least wanted to give the sort of shotgun, which we a lot of times do at the beginning of a season. We'll give the shotgun before we get down into a little bit of the nuance of it. So you get a feel and idea of all these. And so thank you for joining us. There's going to be a lot more to come on the instincts in 2021, and it's going to be fantastic.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for listening. It's an honor to get to share this with you. But the podcast is broad and it's impersonal. And so if you need that personal connection and you want to work with us individually, you can reach out to us at theartofgrowth.org. Go there to sign up for the newsletter so that you can be the first to receive an instincts tool that we are working on, or connect to see how else we can help you. So now, my friends, may you lean into self-knowledge this week. May you see more of who you've been and who you are becoming. May you become aware of the stories that have shaped you and the memories that have stuck to show something to you about where you have been and where you are going. May you use this tool to lean into becoming even more of a student of your story and tap into the wisdom that is within you, that has drawn you to this work because it wants to take you further than you have ever been, to be more than you have ever thought possible, because it is within you. Have a great week.